The blood-red sunrise painted the Montana sky as Beatrice Abbott clutched her infant daughter to her chest, the wagon wheels kicking up dust behind her as she was driven beyond the town limits of Silver Creek. It was 1875, and the whispers had turned to shouts, the sidelong glances to pointed fingers, all because she had given birth 6 months after her husband had been lowered into the cold, unforgiving ground. Jezebel, they had called her. Harlot, they had sneered. The women who had once taken tea with her now crossed the street to avoid her path, and the men who had tipped their hats in respect now leered with hungry eyes, assuming a widow with a babe and no husband would welcome any attention. The truth was far more painful than their vicious gossip. Thomas, her husband of 5 years, had returned from a cattle drive changed, wild with fever and racked with coughing that brought blood to his lips. In their final weeks together, as consumption ravaged his body, they had made love one last time, a desperate, clinging act of farewell. The child had been conceived in those moments, though Thomas never lived to know he had left her with this precious gift. Now, as the wagon driver deposited her meager belongings at the edge of a rutted trail that led to a small, abandoned homestead 10 miles from town, Beatrice felt the weight of her new reality. She was alone, truly alone, with only her 3-month-old daughter, Elizabeth, and whatever she could carry from her former life. "This is as far as I go, Mrs. Abbott," the driver said, not meeting her eyes. "Pastor says the old Milner place is just over that rise. It ain't much, but it'll keep you from the elements." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," she replied with as much dignity as she could muster, though her voice trembled. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. As the wagon turned and rolled away, kicking up dust that stung her eyes and made her baby whimper, Beatrice's shoulders sagged. The parcel of land before her was desolate, overgrown with weeds, the small cabin's roof partially collapsed, the well likely dry. How would she survive the coming winter? How would she feed her child? She had been the schoolteacher in Silver Creek, respected and valued until suspicion and judgment had stripped her of position and purpose. Now, she was nothing more than a cautionary tale, a woman cast out for the sin of bringing life into the world at the wrong time. With Elizabeth swaddled against her chest, Beatrice took one faltering step forward, then another. She would not lie down and die, she would not surrender to despair. For her daughter's sake, she would find a way. In the distance, a plume of dust rose along the horizon. A rider was approaching, the silhouette growing larger against the fierce morning light. Beatrice tensed, one hand protectively covering her daughter's head. Out here, alone, a woman was vulnerable to all manner of dangers. The rider slowed his horse as he approached, and Beatrice could make out the broad shoulders, the weathered hat pulled low, the sun glinting off what appeared to be a badge on his chest. A lawman, perhaps, or someone official sent to ensure she had truly left town property. "Madam," the man called out, his deep voice carrying on the wind. "Didn't expect to find anyone out here." As he drew closer, Beatrice could see that he was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with a face tanned by sun and wind, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. He rode tall in the saddle, confidence in every line of his body. "I've been instructed to make this my home now," she replied stiffly, chin held high despite the humiliation burning in her chest. The man swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who had spent his life in the saddle. He approached slowly, hands visible at his sides as if understanding her wariness. "Name's Dawson O'Malley," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Deputy Marshal for this territory. And you would be Beatrice Abbott," she answered, shifting Elizabeth slightly as the baby fussed. "And my daughter, Elizabeth." His gaze dropped to the infant, then back to Beatrice's face, taking in her simple dress, the strands of honey blonde hair escaping from her bonnet, the determined set of her green eyes despite the exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath them. "The Milner place ain't fit for a woman and child," he stated plainly. "Roof's half gone, critters have likely made themselves at home, and the nearest water that ain't tainted with minerals is a mile away." "I'm aware of the challenges, Mr. O'Malley," Beatrice replied. But as I have been made to understand, my options are limited. Understanding dawned in his eyes. He'd heard the gossip, no doubt. Everyone within 50 miles probably had by now. "You're the schoolteacher," he said. The widow, Beatrice, swallowed hard. "I was the schoolteacher, yes." Dawson O'Malley looked at her for a long moment, then at the pitiful pile of belongings at her feet. Without another word, he moved to gather her things, loading them onto his horse. "What are you doing?" she asked, alarmed. "My ranch is 3 miles east of here," he said matter-of-factly. "Got a proper cabin with a solid roof, clean water and food. You and the little one will stay there until we figure something better." "I couldn't possibly, madam," he interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "That baby won't survive a week out here, and neither will you. I've got a spare room my sister used when she visited last summer. It's yours for as long as you need it." Beatrice wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it, but Elizabeth squirmed against her chest, reminding her that her daughter's needs came before her own dignity. "Why would you help us?" she asked, suspicious of kindness after so much cruelty. Dawson finished securing her trunk to his horse and turned to her, his expression solemn. "Because my own mama was cast out similar when my pa died. She had me and my sister to raise, and if not for the kindness of strangers, we wouldn't have made it." He stepped closer, his tall frame blocking the harsh sunlight, casting a shadow that felt strangely protective rather than threatening. He held out his hand, work roughened and strong. "Mrs. Abbott, I ain't offering charity, I'm offering a fair chance. You can cook, I reckon, and keep house while you figure your next steps. I'm gone most days riding patrol. The place could use a woman's touch." Beatrice hesitated, studying his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found none, only a straightforward honesty that was rare in a world that had shown her its ugliest side. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. "You're mine now," he said, and before she could bristle at the presumption, he continued, "to protect and provide for, same as I would for any soul who needed shelter under my roof. You and the little one both." In that moment, with the vast Montana sky stretching endlessly above them and the uncertain future ahead, Beatrice felt something she had not experienced since Thomas drew his last breath. "Hope. Thank you, Mr. O'Malley," she whispered. "Dawson," he corrected, a small smile softening his weathered features. "If we're to share a home, seems right to use given names, Mrs. Abbott." "Beatrice," she replied, and for the first time in months she smiled too. As he helped her mount his horse, Elizabeth cradled securely between them. Beatrice didn't know that this unexpected encounter would change the course of both their lives forever. She only knew that, for today at least, she and her daughter would be safe. The O'Malley ranch was modest but well-maintained, a testament to Dawson's industrious nature. The main cabin was constructed of sturdy logs with a stone chimney that promised warmth in the coming winter months. A small barn housed his horses and a milk cow, while a chicken coop stood nearby. A vegetable garden, somewhat neglected but still producing, spread along one side of the property. "It ain't much," Dawson said as he helped Beatrice down from the horse, "but it's mine, free and clear. 20 acres, good water from the spring up yonder, and decent grazing for the few head of cattle I keep." "It's wonderful," Beatrice replied honestly, taking in the peaceful setting. After the stifling judgment of Silver Creek, the open space felt like freedom. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished but clean. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace at one end. 2 doors led off the main room, one to Dawson's bedroom and the other to the smaller room he had mentioned. "My sister Fiona fixed it up when she stayed," he explained, showing Beatrice to the smaller room. "There's a bed, a chest for your things, and I can bring in the cradle from the attic. My mother saved it from when we were babes." The room was simple but charming, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and curtains at the small window that looked out over the rolling grassland. "This is more than generous," Beatrice said, emotion tightening her throat. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," Dawson replied. "Just honest folk helping each other is all." As the day progressed, they fell into an awkward but functional routine. Dawson brought in the cradle as promised, then set about his chores while Beatrice fed Elizabeth and settled her for a nap. Once the baby was sleeping, Beatrice explored the kitchen, taking inventory of supplies and planning what she might prepare for their evening meal. "Hope you don't mind, but I thought I'd make supper," she called to Dawson when he came in from the barn. "It's the least I can do." "Been living on salt pork and beans for longer than I care to admit," he answered with a self-deprecating smile. "Anything you fix is bound to be an improvement." As Beatrice worked at the stove, she found herself studying Dawson when he wasn't looking. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, no wasted motion or pretense. He was handsome in a rugged way, his features strong rather than fine, his body hardened by physical labor rather than deliberately cultivated. She caught herself and looked away quickly when he glanced in her direction. It wasn't proper for her to notice such things about a man who had offered her shelter out of kindness. Besides, she was still a widow in mourning, with a babe to raise and a reputation in tatters. That evening, they ate a simple meal of cornbread and stew made from vegetables from the garden and some dried beef Dawson had cured the previous fall. The food wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling, and Dawson ate with obvious appreciation. "Best meal I've had in months," he declared, wiping his mouth with a napkin, a small gesture of civilization that surprised her. "Thank you," Beatrice replied, pleased despite herself. "Tomorrow I can bake bread if you have flour to spare. Supplies are yours to use as needed," he said. "I'll be riding out early, got to check on some reports of cattle rustling near the Harrison place, but I should be back by sundown." "We'll be fine," Beatrice assured him, gesturing to Elizabeth, who was sleeping peacefully in the cradle Dawson had placed near the fire. A silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable but laden with unspoken questions. Finally, Dawson cleared his throat. "I know it ain't my place to ask, but those folks in town, they were wrong to treat you the way they did." Beatrice stiffened. "You don't know the circumstances." "Don't need to," he said simply. "A woman and her babe should never be cast out to fend for themselves, no matter what." The unexpected understanding in his voice threatened to undo her carefully maintained composure. For months, she had held herself together through sheer determination, refusing to break even as whispers became condemnation, as friends became accusers. "My husband died of consumption," she said quietly, needing suddenly to speak the truth aloud to someone who might actually listen. "Thomas was sick for weeks. The doctor said it wasn't contagious anymore, just the final stages. We were husband and wife one last time before he passed. Elizabeth is his daughter, born after he died, but conceived in marriage." Dawson nodded, his expression grave but not judgmental. "Folks see what they want to see, believe what makes them feel better about themselves." "I tried to explain," Beatrice continued, the words spilling out now, "but they had already decided. The pastor said I was lying to cover my shame. The women said no decent widow would lie with her dying husband, as if love stops when illness begins. Their cruelty says more about them than it does about you," Dawson said, his voice tight with an anger that surprised her. "You've nothing to be ashamed of." The simple validation, after months of judgment, was too much. Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She covered her face with her hands, mortified to be crying in front of this virtual stranger but unable to stop. Suddenly, she felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. Dawson had moved to stand beside her, offering comfort without intrusion. "I'm sorry," she managed, wiping at her tears. "I don't normally." "You've been strong for too long," he said. "Sometimes a body just needs to let go." Something in his tone made her look up at him. In his gray eyes, she saw not pity but respect, and something else, a recognition, perhaps, of shared experience with life's harshness. "Thank you," she whispered. He squeezed her shoulder once, then stepped back, giving her space to collect herself. "Think nothing of it. Now you should get some rest. Dawn comes early out here." As Beatrice retired to her room that night, Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in the cradle beside her bed, she found herself wondering about the quiet, steady man who had opened his home to them. Who was Dawson O'Malley, really? What had shaped him into the kind of man who would extend such generosity to strangers? And why did his simple kindness affect her so deeply? Sleep claimed her before she could ponder these questions further, and for the first time in months, she slept without fear of what the morning would bring. The next few days settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and comforting to Beatrice. Dawson would rise before dawn, see to the animals, and ride out on his duties as deputy marshal. Beatrice would tend to Elizabeth, keep the cabin, prepare meals, and gradually expand her efforts to the neglected garden and the mending of Dawson's work clothes. In the evenings, they would share supper and conversation. Dawson spoke of his patrols, the people he encountered, the beauty and harshness of the territory. Beatrice found herself telling him about her life before her childhood in Pennsylvania, her training as a teacher, her journey west with Thomas following the war. "How did you come to be a deputy marshal?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Elizabeth was asleep inside, giving Beatrice a rare moment of adult conversation. Dawson leaned back in his chair, stretching his long legs out before him. "Wasn't my first choice," he admitted. "Came west after the war like so many. Tried my hand at mining, then cattle driving, had a knack for tracking and staying calm in a crisis. Marshal Hollister noticed, offered me the deputy position 3 years back." "Do you enjoy it?" He considered the question thoughtfully. "Most days, like helping folks, keeping the peace. Don't much care for the shooting parts, though they happen less often than the dime novels would have you believe. Have you ever?" Beatrice hesitated, uncertain if the question was too personal. "Killed a man," Dawson finished for her, his voice quiet. "Yes, 3 times. Never by choice, always because there was no other way. Don't sleep well after, no matter the circumstances." The honesty of his answer touched her. Here was a man who carried power but took no pleasure in wielding it against others. "Thomas was in the war," she said. "He never spoke of it, but he had nightmares sometimes." Dawson nodded. "Many do. Was with the 7th Pennsylvania Cavalry myself. Saw things no man should see, did things that haunt me still. Coming west was a chance to start fresh." "Is that why you never married?" The question slipped out before Beatrice could stop it, and she immediately flushed. "I apologize. That was terribly forward of me." To her relief, Dawson didn't seem offended. "Fair question given you're living under my roof," he said with a slight smile. "Truth is, I was engaged once back east. Mary was her name. She took ill with diphtheria the week before our wedding, didn't survive." "I'm so sorry," Beatrice said softly. "Was a lifetime ago," he replied, though his eyes held shadows of old grief. "Out here, eligible women are scarce, and I've been busy building something of my own. Haven't given much thought to marriage these past years." They sat in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear, brilliant and numerous in the clear mountain air. "What will you do?" Dawson asked eventually. "Once you've had time to gather yourself and make plans." It was a question Beatrice had been asking herself daily. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can teach, but no school would hire me now, not with the rumors. I can sew, cook, keep accounts, but who would employ a woman with my reputation? Who would even give me a chance to prove myself?" "Folks' memories are shorter than you might think," Dawson said, "and not everyone puts stock in gossip." "Perhaps," Beatrice replied, unconvinced. "For now, I'm grateful for this sanctuary, Elizabeth and I both." "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," Dawson assured her. "Having you here, it's good. Cabin feels more like a home with you and the little one around." Something in his tone made Beatrice's heart flutter unexpectedly. She told herself it was merely gratitude for his kindness, nothing more. She was a widow with a babe, he a confirmed bachelor. Any other thoughts would be inappropriate and unwelcome. Yet as they sat in the gathering darkness, the sounds of the night rising around them, Beatrice couldn't deny that Dawson O'Malley's presence gave her a sense of security she had thought lost forever. As summer waned into early autumn, the days grew shorter and the nights cooler. Beatrice settled more deeply into life at the O'Malley Ranch, finding purpose in the daily chores and joy in watching Elizabeth grow stronger and more alert with each passing day. The baby was nearly 4 months old now, cooing and smiling, reaching for the world around her with curious fingers. To Beatrice's surprise, Dawson had a natural way with the infant, often holding her in his strong arms when he returned from his patrols, talking to her as if she understood every word. "She's got your eyes," he remarked one evening as Elizabeth gazed up at him, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. "Same shade of green as new spring grass." "But her father's chin," Beatrice replied, a familiar pang of sadness mingling with the joy of seeing her daughter thrive. "Thomas had that same determined little chin." Dawson nodded, respecting her memories rather than trying to erase them. It was one of the many things Beatrice had come to appreciate about him, his ability to acknowledge the past while helping her build a present that wasn't defined by loss. Their routine had evolved into something that felt almost like family, though neither of them named it as such. Dawson had begun teaching Beatrice to ride properly, using his gentlest mare. The skill gave her a freedom she had never known, allowing her to explore the surrounding countryside while Elizabeth napped in a sling against her chest. On Sundays, when Dawson didn't ride patrol, they would sometimes venture into the smaller settlement of Pine Hollow, 15 miles east of Silver Creek. Unlike the larger town that had cast her out, Pine Hollow was little more than a trading post, a saloon, and a handful of homesteads. No one there knew Beatrice's story, and with Dawson at her side, they assumed she was his wife or sister. It was during one such Sunday outing that their fragile peace was disrupted. They had just finished trading some of Beatrice's preserved vegetables for flour and sugar when a voice called out from across the dusty street. "Deputy O'Malley." "That you?" Dawson turned, positioning himself slightly in front of Beatrice and Elizabeth in an instinctively protective stance. "Sheriff Coleman," he acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you to Pine Hollow?" Sheriff Coleman, a heavyset man with a drooping mustache and bloodshot eyes, ambled over. His gaze slid from Dawson to Beatrice, narrowing as he took in her face. "Well now, if it isn't the widow Abbott," he drawled, touching the brim of his hat in mock politeness. "Folks in Silver Creek been wondering where you disappeared to. Pastor Wilkins was most concerned about your immortal soul." Beatrice felt her cheeks burn, but she lifted her chin, refusing to show shame. "The pastor made his opinions quite clear when he arranged for my removal from town sheriff." "Just doing the Lord's work, madam," Coleman replied, his tone suggesting anything but godliness. His eyes dropped to Elizabeth. "And the product of your sin seems to be thriving. How interesting." Dawson stepped fully between them, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard. "Mrs. Abbott and her daughter are under my protection, Coleman. They're my guests and deserving of respect." The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. "Your guests, is it? How generous of you, deputy. Taking in strays now, or perhaps you found other benefits to having a lonely widow in your home." The insinuation hung in the air, ugly and explicit. Beatrice clutched Elizabeth tighter, mortification and anger warring within her. Dawson's hand moved subtly closer to his holstered pistol. "Choose your next words carefully, Coleman. That's a lady you're insulting." "Lady," Coleman scoffed. "That's not what the good people of Silver Creek would call her. You know her kind, O'Malley. Can't keep her legs." He never finished the sentence. Dawson's fist connected with the sheriff's jaw in a single, explosive movement, sending the older man sprawling in the dust. "Dawson." Beatrice gasped, shocked by the sudden violence. Coleman sputtered, blood trickling from his split lip as he struggled to his feet. "You'll regret that, O'Malley." "Striking an officer of the law. You're outside your jurisdiction, Coleman, and you've insulted a woman under my protection," Dawson replied, his voice deadly calm. "Consider yourself lucky I didn't do worse." The sheriff glared at them both, wiping blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "This ain't over," he warned. "Marshal Hollister will hear about this and about the company you're keeping." "Tell him whatever you like," Dawson said evenly. "Now move along before I forget my professional courtesy." Coleman spat a glob of blood into the dust, cast one final contemptuous look at Beatrice, and stalked away toward the saloon. As soon as he was out of earshot, Beatrice turned to Dawson, her hands trembling despite her efforts to remain composed. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered urgently. He could cause trouble for you, maybe even cost you your position." "No man speaks to a woman that way in my presence," Dawson replied, flexing his hand where the knuckles had connected with Coleman's face. "Badge or no badge." "But your job is less important than your dignity," he finished firmly. Then, noticing the stares of the few people who had witnessed the confrontation, he added more gently, "Come on, let's head home. I don't like the look in Coleman's eye, and he'll be meaner once he's had a few drinks." The ride back to the ranch was tense and mostly silent. Elizabeth, sensing her mother's distress, fussed in the sling until Beatrice managed to calm her with soft humming. Dawson rode slightly ahead, his shoulders rigid with lingering anger. Only when they were safely back at the cabin, with Elizabeth settled for a nap and coffee brewing on the stove, did Beatrice broach the subject again. "What Coleman said, about me being in your home, it will only fuel more gossip," she said quietly. "I should leave, find somewhere else." Dawson looked up sharply. "Is that what you want, to leave?" "No," Beatrice admitted, surprising herself with her honesty, "but I won't be the cause of trouble for you. You've done too much for us already." Dawson crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar that bisected his left eyebrow, the way his gray eyes darkened like storm clouds when he was troubled. "Beatrice," he said, her name sounding different somehow when he spoke it, "I want you and Elizabeth here, not out of pity or obligation, but because—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Because," she prompted, her heart suddenly racing. "Because these past weeks with you both have been the happiest I can remember in years," he finished simply. "The cabin was just a place to sleep before you came. Now it's a home." Beatrice's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge the growing feelings between them, the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her, the comfort she found in his presence, the admiration she felt watching him with Elizabeth. "What are you saying, Dawson?" she asked, needing clarity, afraid to hope. "I'm saying I care for you," he replied, his voice low and earnest, "for both of you. And I'm asking you to stay, not as my guest or housekeeper, but because you want to be here, with me." The honesty of his declaration left no room for misunderstanding. This was not mere kindness or charity. This was a man offering his heart. "I'm a widow with a child," she said, voicing her deepest fear. "My reputation is in tatters. Being associated with me will only bring you grief and judgment. Do I look like a man who cares much for other folks' opinions?" Dawson asked with a wry smile. "I've lived my life according to my own conscience, Beatrice. And that conscience tells me there's nothing wrong in caring for a woman of courage and character, or for her innocent child." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes, but they were different from the tears of shame and fear she had shed so often in recent months. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something that felt dangerously like joy. "I care for you too," she whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. "More than I thought possible after Thomas, but it's too soon, isn't it?" "Too complicated." Dawson reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Life's too short and too precious to deny what we feel," he said softly. "I'm not asking for promises, Beatrice, just a chance to see where this leads at whatever pace feels right to you." She leaned slightly into his touch, allowing herself this small surrender. "I would like that," she admitted, "to see where this leads." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming his face from handsome to breathtaking. "Then we'll take it one day at a time," he promised. As Elizabeth's soft cries announced her awakening from her nap, they stepped apart, but something fundamental had shifted between them. A door had opened, revealing possibilities neither had dared to imagine just hours before. The confrontation with Sheriff Coleman in Pine Hollow proved to be merely the first ripple in a gathering storm. 3 days later, as dusk was settling over the land, Marshal Hollister himself rode up to Dawson's cabin, accompanied by 2 deputies. Beatrice was hanging laundry on the line, Elizabeth sleeping in a basket nearby when she heard the approaching horses. Fear immediately coiled in her stomach. Multiple riders at this hour rarely brought good news. Dawson emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression guarded as he recognized his superior. "Marshal," he called in greeting, moving to stand near Beatrice, a subtle statement of allegiance. "What brings you out this way, Marshal Hollister?" A tall, spare man with iron-gray hair and a deeply lined face, dismounted with the stiffness of someone who had spent too many years in the saddle. His weathered features were grim as he approached. "Deputy O'Malley," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Mrs. Abbott." His inclusion of Beatrice in the greeting was polite but cool. "Would you care to come inside, Marshal?" Beatrice offered, gathering her composure. "I could prepare some coffee." "That won't be necessary, madam," Hollister replied. "This is official business that won't take long." Dawson's posture tensed almost imperceptibly. "What kind of official business?" Hollister's gaze shifted between them, assessing. "I've had a formal complaint from Sheriff Coleman of Silver Creek. He claims you assaulted him without provocation 3 days ago in Pine Hollow." "There was provocation," Dawson responded evenly. "Coleman insulted Mrs. Abbott in the vilest terms possible. I reacted as any man would in defense of a lady's honor." "So you admit to striking him?" "I do," the marshal sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through his thinning hair. "Dawson, you're one of my best deputies, but I can't have my men brawling with other lawmen, regardless of the reason." "I understand that, sir," Dawson acknowledged, "but I'd do the same again if faced with the same circumstances." Hollister's expression hardened. "That's what I was afraid you'd say." He reached inside his coat and produced an official-looking document. "By the authority vested in me as federal marshal for this territory, I am placing you on suspension without pay for 30 days, pending a formal inquiry into your conduct." Beatrice gasped softly. This was exactly what she had feared, Dawson suffering consequences for defending her. Dawson accepted the document without reaction, though Beatrice could see the muscle in his jaw tighten. "And my badge, you'll surrender it now," Hollister said, "along with any firearms issued by the marshal's office." With deliberate movements, Dawson unpinned the badge from his vest and handed it over, followed by his service revolver. His personal weapons, a Winchester rifle and a Colt, remained in the cabin. "Is there anything else, Marshal?" he asked, his voice betraying nothing of what he must be feeling. Hollister hesitated, glancing at Beatrice and the sleeping baby. "There's one other matter," he said, his tone marginally softer. "The town council of Silver Creek has filed a formal request that Mrs. Abbott be investigated for improper conduct." "What?" Beatrice's voice rose in shock. "On what grounds?" "They claim you've engaged in immoral behavior as evidenced by your situation," Hollister replied, having the decency to look uncomfortable. "They're particularly concerned that you're now living unchaperoned with Deputy O'Malley, which they view as further evidence of loose morals." Rage flashed across Dawson's features. "That's preposterous," he snapped. "Mrs. Abbott is a widow whose husband died of consumption. The child is his, born after his death but conceived in wedlock. She was cast out based on gossip and spite, and I offered her shelter because it was the right thing to do." "Be that as it may," Hollister continued, "the council is demanding action. They want custody of the child transferred to a proper Christian home until Mrs. Abbott's fitness as a mother can be determined." "No," the word tore from Beatrice's throat, raw with terror. She rushed to Elizabeth's basket, scooping up the still sleeping infant and clutching her protectively to her chest. "You can't take my baby. You can't." Dawson moved swiftly to stand between Beatrice and the lawman, his hand instinctively going to where his gun would normally be. "That's not going to happen, Marshal," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Not today, not ever." The two deputies behind Hollister tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. "Stand down, all of you," Hollister ordered sharply, raising a hand to his men. "I'm not here to take any child from its mother today. I'm simply delivering the formal notice of the council's petition. There will be a hearing in Silver Creek in 2 weeks' time. You're both required to attend." He produced another document, which Dawson took with a steady hand despite the fury evident in his every movement. "Until then," Hollister continued, "the child remains with her mother, but I strongly suggest you both consider your situation." The council is determined, and they have influential supporters, including Judge Harmon. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. Judge Harmon was known throughout the territory for his strict moral code and harsh sentences, if he presided over the hearing. "Thank you for the warning, Marshal," Dawson said stiffly. "Will that be all?" Hollister nodded, replacing his hat. "For now, I'm sorry it's come to this, Dawson. You're a good lawman." "I thought you believed in justice, sir," Dawson replied, disappointment evident in his tone. "I do," Hollister said, mounting his horse. "Which is why I'm giving you fair warning. Get your affairs in order, both of you. This won't end well if you fight it." With that ominous parting statement, the marshal and his deputies rode away, leaving Beatrice and Dawson standing in the gathering darkness, the documents of their respective condemnations clutched in their hands. As soon as the riders were out of sight, Beatrice's composure crumbled. Sobs racked her body as she held Elizabeth tightly, the baby now awake and fussing at her mother's distress. "They want to take her," she wept. "My baby, my little girl, how can they? What right do they have?" Dawson guided her gently into the cabin, his arms strong around her shoulders. "They won't take her," he promised fiercely. "I won't let that happen, Beatrice. You have my word." Inside, he stoked the fire and prepared tea while Beatrice calmed Elizabeth, murmuring reassurances to the infant that she prayed were not lies. When the baby was settled again, Dawson handed Beatrice a steaming cup. "Drink," he urged. "Then we'll talk about what to do." The warm liquid helped steady her nerves, though fear still churned in her stomach. "This is my fault," she said miserably. "You've lost your position because of me, and now they want to take Elizabeth." "None of this is your fault," Dawson countered firmly. "The fault lies with small-minded people who use religion and morality as weapons to control others." He sat beside her at the table, his large hands cradling his own mug. "As for my job, 30 days suspension is nothing if it means I stood up for what's right. But what will we do about the hearing?" Beatrice asked, desperation edging her voice. "Judge Harmon won't be sympathetic." "He'll take Elizabeth away, I know it." Dawson was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as if seeking answers in the dancing flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was resolute. "There's only one sure way to stop them," he said. "We need to get married." Beatrice's head snapped up, certain she had misheard. "What marriage?" Dawson repeated, turning to face her fully. "If you're my wife, they have no grounds to take Elizabeth." A child with 2 parents living in a stable home with sufficient means of support, no judge, not even Harmon, could justify removing her. But marriage, Dawson, that's... Beatrice struggled to find words. "Extreme," he offered with a hint of a smile, "perhaps, but effective." "We barely know each other," she protested, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. In the weeks they had lived under the same roof, she had come to know Dawson O'Malley better than many couples who courted for years. "We know what matters," he said quietly. "I know you're kind, strong, intelligent, and devoted to your daughter. You know I'm honest, hardworking, and that I care deeply for both of you. The rest, we can learn along the way." "But marriage should be based on love, not necessity," Beatrice said, voicing the true source of her hesitation. Dawson reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Beatrice, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, finding them intense with emotion. "I'm not proposing out of necessity alone," he said softly. "I meant what I said the other day. I care for you deeply. Given time, I believe what I feel could grow into the kind of love songs are written about. But even if it doesn't, I would be honored to be your husband and Elizabeth's father. We could build a good life together, based on respect and caring." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes again, but they were different from the tears of fear and grief she had shed earlier. "You would do that, tie yourself to us forever just to keep us safe." "Not just for that," he corrected gently. "But yes, I would, in a heartbeat." His thumb stroked the back of her hand. "The question is, could you see yourself married to me, not just to protect Elizabeth, but as a true partnership?" Beatrice looked around the cabin that had become more of a home to her than the house in Silver Creek had ever been. She thought of the past weeks, Dawson's kindness, his respect, the way he made her laugh, the safety she felt in his presence. She thought of how he held Elizabeth, how naturally he had stepped into the role of protector and provider for them both. Was it love? Perhaps not yet, not in the all-consuming way she had once loved Thomas. But there was affection, respect, and a connection that grew stronger each day. It was, she realized, a foundation stronger than many marriages began with. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tumult of emotions within her. "I could see myself married to you, Dawson O'Malley, not just for protection, but as a true partnership," as you said, his face lit with a joy that took her breath away. "Is that a yes, then?" he asked, squeezing her hand gently. Beatrice took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would irrevocably change the course of her life and Elizabeth's. "Yes," she replied. "I will marry you." Dawson's smile was radiant as he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then we have a plan," he said, "and more importantly, we have hope." For the first time since Marshal Hollister's arrival, Beatrice felt the crushing weight of fear lift slightly from her shoulders. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Once the decision to marry was made, practical considerations took precedence over emotional ones. Dawson rode to Pine Hollow the very next morning to speak with the circuit preacher, Reverend Mitchell, who happened to be passing through. Unlike the self-righteous Pastor Wilkins of Silver Creek, Reverend Mitchell was a pragmatic man who had seen too much of life's harshness to judge others easily. When Dawson explained their situation, the Reverend agreed not only to perform the ceremony but to do so quickly before he moved on to his next stop. "Love comes in many forms," he told them when he arrived at the ranch 3 days later. "Sometimes it's there from the start, burning bright as a wildfire. Other times it grows slowly like a sturdy oak. Both are blessed in the eyes of the Lord." The ceremony itself was simple but dignified. Beatrice wore her best dress, a deep blue calico that brought out the green of her eyes with wildflowers Dawson had gathered that morning woven into her honey blonde hair. Elizabeth, dressed in a gown Beatrice had carefully sewn from fabric purchased in Pine Hollow, watched the proceedings with wide, curious eyes from her basket. Dawson, clean-shaven and wearing a crisp white shirt with his Sunday trousers, looked more nervous than Beatrice had ever seen him. His hands trembled slightly as he placed a simple gold band on her finger, his mother's ring, which he had kept safe all these years. "With this ring I thee wed," he recited, his voice steady despite his obvious emotion, "and all my worldly goods I thee endow." When Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson's kiss was gentle, respectful, but carried a promise of deeper feelings that made Beatrice's heart race. Their only witnesses were the Reverend himself and Dawson's nearest neighbors, the Hendersons, an elderly couple who had homesteaded 20 miles away. Mrs. Henderson wept openly during the ceremony, later embracing Beatrice and whispering, "You've brought light back to that man's eyes, dear." "Bless you for that." That night, after a celebratory meal and the departure of their guests, Beatrice and Dawson faced the most awkward aspect of their hasty marriage, the sleeping arrangements. Despite their new legal status, they were still in many ways strangers to each other. "I'll take the main room," Dawson offered, gesturing to the leather sofa near the fireplace. "You and Elizabeth keep the bedroom." "But it's your bed," Beatrice protested. "And you're too tall for that sofa. Your feet will hang off the end." "I've slept in worse places," he assured her with a smile. "Besides, we have time, Beatrice. Being married on paper doesn't mean, well, it doesn't mean we have to rush anything else." The consideration in his words touched her deeply. How many men would be so patient, so respectful of her feelings? "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for this, but for everything, for saving us." "You saved me too," he replied, surprising her. "This place was just somewhere to sleep before you and Elizabeth came. Now it's alive again." Impulsively, Beatrice stood on tiptoe and pressed a kiss to his cheek, inhaling the clean scent of soap and the underlying maleness that was uniquely Dawson. "Good night, husband," she whispered, testing the word on her tongue, his eyes darkened at the sound. "Good night, wife," he returned, his voice husky. As Beatrice settled into bed that night, Elizabeth sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 6 months ago, she had been a respectable widow, grieving her husband and anticipating her child's birth with mingled joy and sorrow. 4 months ago, she had been cast out in disgrace, her reputation in tatters, her future uncertain. And now she was Mrs. Dawson O'Malley, with a home, protection, and the promise of a new beginning. It wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself, but as she drifted toward sleep, Beatrice realized it might be exactly the life she needed. The day of the hearing in Silver Creek arrived with ominous storm clouds gathering on the horizon, matching Beatrice's mood as she dressed with trembling hands. Despite their marriage, the town council had not withdrawn their petition. If anything, news of the hasty wedding had only fueled their righteousness. "They're calling it proof of our immoral conduct," Dawson had reported grimly after a trip to Pine Hollow for supplies. "Saying we were carrying on an affair all along and only married to try to deceive the court." Now, as she fastened the buttons of her most conservative dress high-necked, long-sleeved, and somber gray, Beatrice fought against rising panic. What if it wasn't enough? What if Judge Harmon took Elizabeth anyway? The thought was unbearable. "You look beautiful," Dawson said from the doorway, startling her from her dark thoughts. He was dressed in his best suit, hair neatly combed, the picture of respectability. "I look terrified," she corrected with a weak attempt at humor. He crossed to her, strong hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Listen to me, Beatrice. We've done nothing wrong. We're legally married. I have a good reputation apart from my current suspension, and even that was for defending a lady's honor. We have a solid home, sufficient income from the ranch, and I'll be reinstated as deputy once my suspension is lifted. No judge can reasonably rule against us. Judge Harmon isn't known for being reasonable where morality is concerned," Beatrice reminded him. "Then we'll appeal," Dawson said firmly. "We'll take it all the way to the territorial governor if need be. I swore to protect you and Elizabeth, and I meant it." His certainty calmed her somewhat. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed a soft kiss to his lips, their first real kiss since the wedding ceremony. "Thank you," she whispered against his mouth. Dawson's eyes darkened, and for a moment he held her closer, his kiss deepening before he reluctantly pulled away. "We should go," he said, his voice rough. "We don't want to be late." The ride to Silver Creek was tense, the threatening sky occasionally illuminated by distant lightning. Elizabeth, sensing the anxiety, fussed in the sling against Beatrice's chest until Dawson began singing softly old trail songs and lullabies that gradually soothed the baby to sleep. Beatrice marveled at the sight of this strong, capable man crooning gently to her daughter. In that moment, she realized that what had begun as a marriage of convenience was becoming something far deeper, at least for her. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. Silver Creek looked much as it had when Beatrice had been driven away 3 months earlier. The main street was lined with the same buildings: the general store, the church, the schoolhouse where she had once taught, the sheriff's office. People stopped to stare as they rode past, whispers following in their wake. Beatrice held her head high, refusing to show the shame these people expected. She was Mrs. Dawson O'Malley now, a respected rancher's wife, not the outcast they had condemned. The town hall was crowded when they arrived, curious onlookers filling the benches, leaving only the front row for the actual participants in the hearing. Pastor Wilkins sat with the town council members, his thin face set in lines of righteous condemnation. Sheriff Coleman was there too, sporting a yellowing bruise on his jaw from Dawson's punch, his expression smug. Judge Harmon, an imposing figure with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes, entered from a side door, taking his place at the raised desk at the front of the room. The crowd immediately fell silent. "This court is now in session," the judge announced, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall. "We are here to consider the petition brought by the town council of Silver Creek regarding the custody of the infant Elizabeth Abbott, born to Beatrice Abbott, now Beatrice O'Malley." He peered over his spectacles at Beatrice and Dawson. "I understand the two of you were married recently." Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Dawson replied, standing tall beside Beatrice. 2 weeks ago, by Reverend Mitchell of the Pine Hollow Circuit, Judge Harmon made a note, and this marriage took place after you learned of this hearing. It did, Dawson acknowledged honestly. But that doesn't change the fact that it's legal and binding. Pastor Wilkins rose from his seat, unable to contain himself. Your Honor, if I may, this hasty wedding is clearly an attempt to circumvent justice. Mrs. Abbott, I refuse to dignify this sham marriage by using her new name, has demonstrated a pattern of immoral behavior that makes her unfit to raise a child in a God-fearing community. You'll have your turn to speak, Pastor, Judge Harmon admonished. For now, I'd like to hear from Mrs. O'Malley herself. He turned his penetrating gaze to Beatrice. Young woman, can you explain the circumstances of your child's birth? Beatrice stood, conscious of every eye in the room upon her. Elizabeth stirred in the sling, and Beatrice rested a protective hand on her daughter's back. My husband, Thomas Abbott, died of consumption in October of last year, she began, her voice surprisingly steady. Elizabeth was born in April, 6 months after his death. She was conceived during our marriage in the final weeks of Thomas's life. The doctor had assured us that the consumption was no longer contagious at that stage. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some skeptical, others sympathetic. And you expect us to believe that a man on his deathbed was capable of such activities? Pastor Wilkins interjected, his face flushed with indignation. Thomas was weakened but still able to move about in his final weeks, Beatrice replied, refusing to be shamed for the last act of love between her and her dying husband. We had been married for 5 years. It was natural for us to seek comfort in each other, knowing our time together was limited. Judge Harmon raised a hand to silence the growing whispers. And what proof do you have of this timeline, Mrs. O'Malley? Medical records, witnesses? Doctor. Simmons attended Thomas in his illness, Beatrice said. He was aware of our circumstances, and Mrs. Parker, the midwife who delivered Elizabeth, can attest that she was a full-term baby, not premature as some have suggested. Doctor. Simmons has since moved to Denver, Pastor Wilkins pointed out triumphantly, and Mrs. Parker is her cousin, hardly an impartial witness. Second cousin, Beatrice corrected, and a woman of impeccable reputation until she supported my account. The debate continued for nearly an hour, with the town council presenting their case that Beatrice was of questionable moral character and therefore unfit to raise a child. They cited her hasty marriage to Dawson as further evidence of loose morals, insinuating that they had been carrying on an illicit relationship even before Thomas's death. Throughout it all, Dawson remained a steady presence at Beatrice's side, his jaw tight with controlled anger but his demeanor respectful toward the court. When it was his turn to speak, he addressed Judge Harmon directly. Your Honor, I've been a deputy marshal in this territory for 3 years. Before that, I served in the Union Army with distinction. I've built my ranch through honest work and maintained a reputation for integrity. I would not have married Mrs. Abbott if I had any doubt about her character or the paternity of her child. Yet you struck Sheriff Coleman when he questioned her virtue, Judge Harmon noted. I struck him because he used language no gentleman would use in the presence of a lady, Dawson replied evenly. I would do the same for any woman so insulted, regardless of my personal feelings. And what are your personal feelings, Mr. O'Malley? The judge asked, his shrewd eyes assessing. Did you marry this woman out of genuine affection or merely to thwart this hearing? Beatrice held her breath, suddenly terrified of what Dawson might say. They had not discussed love, only partnership and protection. Dawson's voice, when he spoke, was low but clear enough for everyone to hear. I married Beatrice because I love her, he said simply, and because I already love her daughter as if she were my own. Our timing may have been influenced by this hearing, but our feelings are genuine. I would give my life to protect them both. Tears sprang to Beatrice's eyes at the unexpected declaration. She reached for Dawson's hand, their fingers interlacing in a gesture more powerful than words. Judge Harmon observed them thoughtfully, his expression unreadable. Finally, he cleared his throat. I've heard enough. This court will take a brief recess while I consider my ruling. We will reconvene in 30 minutes. As the judge exited, the room erupted in conversation. Beatrice turned to Dawson, her heart pounding. "Did you mean what you said?" she whispered. "About loving me." His eyes, storm gray and intense, held her steadily. "Every word," he confirmed. "I should have told you before now, but I was afraid it was too soon, that you weren't ready to hear it." "I wasn't," she admitted, "until today." Standing in this room, facing the people who had cast her out, Beatrice had realized something profound. The life she had built with Dawson in just a few short months meant more to her than all her years in Silver Creek. "I love you too," she said softly. "I think I have for weeks now." His smile was like sunlight breaking through the storm clouds outside. He bent to kiss her forehead, mindful of the watchful eyes around them but needing that connection. The 30 minutes of recess seemed to stretch endlessly. Elizabeth woke hungry, and Beatrice discreetly nursed her in a corner of the hall, Dawson standing protectively nearby to shield them from curious stares. Finally, the bailiff called everyone back to order as Judge Harmon returned. The room fell silent as the judge settled himself at his desk, shuffling papers before looking up to address the assembly. "This case presents a complex moral and legal question," he began. "On one hand, we have a community concerned about the welfare of a child and the moral example set by her mother. On the other, we have a legally married couple who appear genuinely devoted to each other and to the child in question." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "Pastor Wilkins and the town council have presented their concerns with sincerity. However, concerns and suspicions are not evidence. The timeline Mrs. O'Malley describes regarding her first husband's death and her child's conception is medically possible, if uncommon." Pastor Wilkins shifted in his seat, his expression darkening as he sensed which way the ruling was heading. "Furthermore," Judge Harmon continued, "the hasty nature of the O'Malley's marriage might raise eyebrows, but it breaks no laws. Many frontier marriages occur with limited courtship due to the practical realities of life in these territories." He picked up his gavel, his decision apparently reached. "Having considered all testimony, I find insufficient evidence to justify removing a child from her mother's care. The petition is denied. Elizabeth Abbott, now Elizabeth O'Malley by virtue of her mother's marriage, will remain with her parents." The gavel came down with a decisive crack, barely audible over the mixture of cheers and outraged gasps that filled the room. Beatrice sagged against Dawson in relief, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," he murmured, his arms strong around her waist. "She's safe. We're safe." As they moved to leave, Pastor Wilkins blocked their path, his thin face flushed with righteous indignation. "This isn't over," he hissed. "The Lord sees the truth, even if Judge Harmon is blind to it. You may have won today, but your sin will find you out." Dawson stepped forward, placing himself between the pastor and Beatrice. "I suggest you step aside," he said quietly. "My wife and daughter have been through enough today." Something in his tone made the pastor pale slightly. With a final glare, he moved aside, allowing them to pass. Outside, the threatened storm had broken at last. Rain poured from leaden skies, drumming on the boardwalk and turning the main street to mud. Yet to Beatrice, it felt like cleansing, washing away the last vestiges of her old life and the shadow that had hung over them for so long. "I don't want to stay in town tonight," she said as they sheltered under the town hall's overhang. "I know it's raining, but we'll go home," Dawson agreed immediately. "I've had enough of Silver Creek to last a lifetime." They made the journey back to the ranch in steady rain, Elizabeth sheltered beneath Dawson's slicker, nestled between them on the wagon seat. Despite the discomfort of wet clothes and the chill seeping into their bones, Beatrice felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. They were free, truly free to build their life together without the specter of judgment hanging over them. By the time they reached the ranch, night had fallen, the rain still pattering on the roof as they hurried inside. Dawson built up the fire while Beatrice changed Elizabeth and settled her in her cradle. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Dawson waiting with 2 cups of hot coffee laced with honey, a rare treat they saved for special occasions. To freedom, he said, raising his cup in a toast. To family, she countered, touching her cup gently to his. They sat before the fire, the warmth gradually seeping back into their rain-chilled bodies, neither speaking but both aware of the shift in their relationship. The declarations of love spoken in the courthouse had changed something fundamental between them. Finally, Dawson set his empty cup aside and turned to her, his expression serious. "Beatrice, I meant what I said today. I love you, but I want you to know that nothing has to change between us until you're ready. I'll still sleep on the sofa, still give you all the time you need." Beatrice studied him in the firelight, this good, honorable man who had risked everything to protect her and Elizabeth, who had declared his love publicly to save them, who now offered patience when most men would claim their husbandly rights without hesitation. In that moment, her last reservations melted away. She loved him not with the innocent first love she had felt for Thomas, but with a deeper, more mature emotion born of shared hardship and mutual respect. Setting her own cup aside, Beatrice rose and held out her hand to him. "I don't want to wait any more," she said softly. "I love you, Dawson O'Malley. You're my husband in every way that matters. I want you to be my husband in all ways now." The wonder and desire that blazed in his eyes took her breath away. He stood, taking her outstretched hand, and followed her to the bedroom that would, from this night forward, be truly theirs. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the patchwork quilt, Beatrice's head resting on Dawson's chest while Elizabeth slept peacefully in her cradle nearby, Beatrice marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she confessed, tracing idle patterns on his skin. "After Thomas died, and then when they cast me out, I thought my life was over." Dawson's fingers combed gently through her unbound hair, spreading it like honey across his shoulder. "I felt the same after Mary died," he admitted. "Closed myself off, focused on building the ranch, doing my job, didn't let myself think about love or family again, until me," she echoed, smiling against his skin. "God works in mysterious ways," Dawson murmured. "If Coleman and the others hadn't been so determined to punish you, you might never have ended up at my door that day." "Do you think we can forgive them, eventually?" Beatrice asked. "Not for their sake, but for ours." Dawson considered this. "Reckon we'll have to," he said finally. "Carrying hate is too heavy a burden for the life we're building. Doesn't mean we have to trust them or seek their company, though." "No," Beatrice agreed. "Silver Creek is part of our past now, not our future." They fell silent, listening to the rain on the roof and Elizabeth's soft breathing from her cradle. Eventually, Dawson spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I was thinking, once my suspension is lifted and I'm back to work, maybe we could add on to the cabin. Another bedroom for Elizabeth as she grows, maybe a proper kitchen for you. Make this place really ours." "I'd like that," Beatrice said, warmed by the long-term planning, the commitment it represented. "And perhaps someday we might need even more room." Dawson's arm tightened around her. "More room for more children," she clarified, suddenly shy. "Our children, if you'd want that." He shifted to look down at her, his expression one of such naked joy that it brought tears to her eyes. "Nothing would make me happier than filling this house with children," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Watching you be a mother to Elizabeth. You're a natural, Beatrice. I'd be the luckiest man alive to have more little ones with you." "Not right away," she cautioned with a smile. "Elizabeth is still so young and we're just finding our way together. But someday." "Someday," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. As they drifted toward sleep, Beatrice reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her here. The grief of losing Thomas, the joy of Elizabeth's birth, the shame and fear of being cast out, the unexpected salvation in Dawson's steady presence, all of it had been necessary to bring her to this moment of perfect contentment. Life in the West was harsh and unpredictable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new sorrows. But tonight, safe in her husband's arms with her daughter sleeping nearby, Beatrice knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 10 years later, the O'Malley Ranch had transformed from a modest homestead into one of the most prosperous properties in the territory. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides, offering views of the mountains to the west and the rolling grasslands to the east. Beatrice stood on that porch now, watching as Dawson taught 7-year-old Thomas and 5-year-old James how to properly groom a horse. Her sons, both with their father's storm-gray eyes, but her honey blonde hair listened with solemn attention, though James could never stay still for long, bouncing on his toes with barely contained energy. In the garden nearby, Elizabeth, now a graceful girl of 10, helped 3-year-old Sarah collect eggs from the chicken coop. Elizabeth had grown into a thoughtful, serious child who mothered her younger siblings with natural authority. She knew the story of her birth and of Thomas Abbott, the father she had never known. Dawson had insisted on keeping Thomas's memory alive, teaching Elizabeth to be proud of both her fathers, the one who had given her life and the one who had chosen to love and raise her. Beatrice's hand rested unconsciously on the gentle swell of her belly, where their 5th child was just beginning to make its presence known. Dawson didn't know yet she was saving the news for tonight, after the children were asleep. "Mama, Mama." Sarah's voice pulled Beatrice from her thoughts as the little girl raced toward the porch, dark curls bouncing, a single egg clutched carefully in her tiny hands. "I found it all by myself. Lizzie didn't even help." "That's wonderful, darling," Beatrice praised, bending, with slightly more effort than before, to accept the precious offering. "This will make a perfect addition to our supper." Elizabeth followed at a more dignified pace, the basket of eggs balanced on her hip in unconscious imitation of her mother. "She did really well, Mama," she reported. "Didn't scare the hens at all this time." "I'm very quiet," Sarah confirmed solemnly, "like a mouse." Beatrice laughed, storing the single egg in her apron pocket. "A very good mouse indeed. Now, who wants to help me make biscuits for supper? Papa's bringing Marshal Hollister home with him when he finishes his patrol." Me, Sarah bounced with excitement. She loved baking and made a glorious mess every time, but Beatrice wouldn't trade those moments for anything. As they moved into the kitchen, Elizabeth asked, "Why is Marshal Hollister coming?" "Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Beatrice assured her oldest child. "He's bringing some papers for Papa to sign. The official documents making Papa the new chief marshal for our district." Elizabeth's face lit up. "So Papa will be Marshal O'Malley now, like in the stories." "Just like in the stories," Beatrice confirmed. Though the dime novels Elizabeth sometimes snuck from her father's desk painted a far more dramatic picture of a marshal's life than the reality of Dawson's work. After Marshal Hollister had reinstated Dawson following his suspension 10 years ago, their relationship had gradually evolved from superior and subordinate to genuine friendship. When Hollister announced his retirement last month, he had recommended Dawson as his replacement without hesitation. The promotion meant more responsibility but also more time at home, as Dawson would oversee the deputies rather than riding regular patrols himself. It was a good change, especially with another baby on the way, though Beatrice knew Dawson would miss the freedom of the open trail sometimes. The afternoon passed in a flurry of baking, cleaning, and preparation. By the time Dawson's voice could be heard greeting the boys in the yard, the house smelled of fresh bread and roasting beef. The table was set with their best dishes, and Sarah had been convinced to change from her egg-smeared dress into a clean pinafore. Beatrice stepped onto the porch to welcome her husband home, her heart still skipping a beat at the sight of him even after all these years. At 40, Dawson O'Malley was more handsome than ever, the youthful leanness of his face having matured into strong, defined features, his dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples. He swung down from his horse with the same easy grace he had shown the day they met, though now he was immediately besieged by small bodies demanding hugs and attention. Behind him, Marshal Hollister dismounted more stiffly, his once iron-gray hair now completely white, his tall frame slightly stooped with age and the weight of decades enforcing the law in a wild territory. "Mrs. O'Malley," the marshal greeted her with a tip of his hat. "Kind of you to have me for supper. Hope it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all, Marshal," Beatrice replied warmly. "We're honored to have you." As the men washed up and the children set the final touches on the table, Beatrice found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. Silver Creek was a distant memory now. They had built their lives around Pine Hollow instead, where Beatrice had eventually opened a small school that served the children of surrounding homesteads. Her reputation as an excellent teacher had long since overshadowed any whispers about her past. Pastor Wilkins had moved on to another parish years ago, and Sheriff Coleman had lost his position after being caught taking bribes from cattle rustlers. The people who had once cast her out had, in the end, received their own forms of justice without Beatrice having to wish it upon them. Supper was a lively affair, with the children eager to share their day's adventures with their father and the distinguished visitor. Marshal Hollister, a confirmed bachelor with no family of his own, seemed to delight in the chaos of the O'Malley household, answering the boys' endless questions about outlaws and gunfights with patient good humor. After the meal, when the official papers had been signed and the children had been herded off to bed with stories and kisses, Beatrice and Dawson walked the marshal to his horse. "You've built something special here, both of you," Hollister said, his weathered face solemn in the moonlight. "Not just the ranch fine as it is, but the family, the life." "Thank you, sir," Dawson replied, shaking the older man's hand. "Couldn't have done it without you giving me a second chance after that suspension." Hollister waved this away. "You were right to defend your lady's honor, even if your methods were a bit direct. I just had to make a show of discipline." His eyes twinkled as he added, "Though I admit, I didn't expect you to marry her quite so promptly." "Best decision I ever made," Dawson said, his arm slipping around Beatrice's waist. "Clearly," Hollister agreed, mounting his horse with a grunt of effort. "Well, I'll leave you to your evening. The territory's in good hands with you as Marshal, O'Malley. Always knew you had it in you." They watched him ride away, his straight back gradually disappearing into the darkness. When they were alone, Dawson turned to Beatrice, drawing her into his arms. "Happy?" he asked, his voice low. "Completely," she assured him, reaching up to trace the beloved lines of his face. "And I have news that I hope will make you happy too." His eyebrows rose in question. Taking his hand, Beatrice placed it gently on her stomach. "We'll be adding to our family again, Marshal O'Malley. Around Christmas, Dr. Martin thinks." Dawson's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. "Another baby, truly, truly," she confirmed, laughing as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "How do you feel?" he asked when he set her down, immediately concerned. "Not too tired?" "No sickness like with James. Some morning queasiness, but nothing like with James," she assured him. "I feel wonderful, truly." Dawson shook his head in amazement. 5 children, he marveled. "If someone had told me 11 years ago that I'd be standing here with the most beautiful woman in the territory as my wife, with 4 incredible children and another on the way, I'd have thought them touched in the head. And if someone had told me, as I stood in the dust outside Silver Creek with nothing but a baby and a broken heart, that I'd find this kind of happiness again." Beatrice's voice caught on the emotion of the memory. "I wouldn't have believed it possible." Dawson drew her close again, his kiss tender and reverent. "I thank God every day for bringing you to my door," he murmured against her lips. "You and Elizabeth were the missing pieces of my heart, Beatrice, and every child since has only made that heart fuller." "As you were the salvation of mine," she replied softly. "My protector, my partner, my love." Hand in hand, they walked back to the house they had built together, not just the physical structure, but the home they had created through love, trust, and shared dreams. Inside, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were cherished. Outside, the Montana night spread vast and star-studded above them, the same sky that had witnessed their first meeting, their struggles, their triumphs. "You're mine," Dawson had said on that fateful day, offering protection when Beatrice had nothing. Now, those same words held a different meaning, a declaration, not of possession, but of belonging, of two souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it most. "And you're mine," Beatrice whispered now as they crossed the threshold of their home together. "Always."